get to know each other with kind of the expectations. Think of this like a small group, small community, and hopefully at the end of it, we can all feel great about the knowledge that we leave with. I will also send the slides in advance. We use Figma, but then we might be able to convert them to PDF or PowerPoint for folks, I think, right? Cool.
Yeah.
And then last, Chris and Ben already introduced themselves. Just for full transparency, this course is a little bit sponsored by Clarify. That's the CRM company that we're making. They are helping pay for Ben and Chris because these things are expensive and hard to run. As much as possible, we're going to try to make the conversation not about Clarify and be unbiased in our tooling vendor choices. We will talk about tools a lot in here. And I think people coming with their own perspectives about what tools to use and why is really healthy and normal. I just want to set that expectations because you obviously see the Clarify logo and you see all of us in here. It's just really hard to run educational content on your own alone. So that's why I've employed some help from Clarify to get this done. And then the last thing is like I don't want to get to the end of the course and be hearing feedback. I love feedback as regularly as possible. If there's topics that don't make sense, if there's things we're not going into, if we're spending too much time on stuff that you don't think is useful, please tell us and we'll try to adjust throughout the course. Um, cool. So we're 20 minutes in. We're going to recover a little bit of time. We're going to move pretty quickly through the content, try to get us to the end of the conversation around 20 minutes before. So 20 minutes of lecture and then we can open up to discussion. Sound good, everybody? Any questions before we start? Things I didn't cover that are burning questions. Cool. All right, guys. Well, welcome to the RevTech class. This is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to skip over the about me. I'll just do a very quick intro. We'll talk about the course overview. We'll do an introduction to RevTech, some of the challenges and like why it's important and why we're even talking about why it's important. Because y'all are like probably thinking, I know it's important. That's why I'm taking this class. But sometimes being able to communicate about why it's important is a really important leadership skill. Talk about some key tools and nomenclature that's particularly helpful for people who already in the field and are just looking to, get the right words. We're gonna talk about RevTech diagramming, and we'll leave with a case study. Okay, cool. About me, you guys probably already know a lot of this stuff. I think the punchline that I would share is that I've like drifted back and forth between B2B and B2C my whole career. I was the first I would call it RevTech operator at a really small company called Branch back in 2015. At the time, though, I didn't really know the word RevTech. I don't even know if RevTech knew that word existed. I was just helping the company set up Salesforce and HubSpot and a bunch of tools. And I really fell in love with this space between product and engineering and marketing and sales, where you're working with systems in order to get work done. There's a really good blog post by Oren Hoffman, who he created the company called Ramp, not our Ramp, the original credit bureau Ramp, like the Ramp that helps you connect data from third parties. And he now runs this company called it's not Radar, it's SafeGraph. Yeah, SafeGraph. But anyways, he has an interesting blog that he publishes once a week. And in it, he said the next kind of generation of most important skills is going to be vendor selection and procurement. And I was thinking about it this week. I think actually like that has been kind of a theme amongst MarTech and RevTech over the years, and something that we'll talk about in this course is that, procurement and picking tools and revenue technology and MarTech technology, it's not just about how things work and how to enable the capability, but to think strategically about how your organization is going to buy and use tools. And so I hope that's like maybe an outcome that we can talk about towards the end of this class as we talk more about organizations. But that's really been a theme across almost every consultancy I've worked for or actual first party role I've worked in is just the ability to set the organization up for scale by thinking long term about the goals and outcomes of the business. Um, I made you guys all share things about me, so I'll share a quick thing about me. I got two dogs, Chloe and Barnaby. They're both greyhounds. They're really cute right here. They're in this photo. Had a third, but he passed away a couple years ago. For fun, I think somebody said they just like run and work out. It kind of feels like my life as well. But I used to be a gymnast, so sometimes I go to an open ball pit and do backflips, which is what that photo is. Um, Class one. So we're going to talk about RevTech. Class two, we're going to talk about the ideal stack. We're going to do Q&A with Justin. If you're in a B2C company or a B2B company, this will be a great time to talk to him. Justin has some incredible experience, both from working at Ramp, but also Segment and Airbnb. Class three, we'll talk about attribution, the early days of setting up your stack. So if you're a founder or an early operator and you're in a new startup, this would be a great class for you. We'll talk to Pranav, who's at Paramark. He's actually also a Clarify customer, and we talk all the time about how do we set up the tools for scale while also trying to be nimble and scrappy. And like what is the right framework for how to think about growing your stack over the maturity of a company. Class four, we'll talk about capabilities and automation. Kiki in particular has a lot of experience at scale, so she'll be a great person to talk about that. And then class five is going to be a mature stack. So like where do you want to go in the long run, bringing product data into your sales efforts. And then the last class is really just going to be in office hours where I'm going to ask you guys to bring any set of questions that you feel like weren't covered in the course, and we're going to try to cover them. Cool. So exclusive. Obviously, you have access to all this content on Maven, but we also have this course content available on Clarify. So we'll be able to provide links to those things. If you don't want to log into Maven, or if you just want to have an easy readable format on a public website, we can send it to you. So, and with that, I think we can kind of jump into it. And sorry, sometimes there's like I'm hovering over the wrong thing. That ad text is not there. I apologize. I'm not in preview mode because I have a bunch of things on my screen at once. So let's start off here. Like why am I asking you what is RevTech? And I think that the reason I'm providing this answer is actually rooted in maybe not this problem, but this dilemma we're facing, which is what do we call things? There's this thing called a go-to-market engineer. There's this thing called sales ops. There's this thing called MarTech. There's this thing called MarOps. And so, like, what is RevTech in this world where you have all these emerging terms? And the way that I think about both RevTech and MarTech is it's the people, the technology, and the systems that power how that specific team works, right? So revenue technology is how people, systems, and processes work together to deliver value for the sales team and specifically. Marketing technology could be considered the same thing for the marketing team. But I really emphasize the idea of its systems, its technology, and its people, right? A lot of people think about tech as only the technology itself, as just the tools, but it's how these things work together in a system and how the people influence that technology that actually makes up the term. And that kind of defines the domain that we're going to be talking about. I alluded to this in a recent Maven Lightning class. You have people, which, I like to use SpongeBob and Patrick Star because my co-founder's name is Patrick. So if he's Patrick, then I'm SpongeBob, obviously. So that's people. We have technology, which is what are the actual tools that you set up in the organization to make you successful. And then we have process, which is how are we building things around the people and the tools to be successful. I often feel like process is kind of people and process are the neglected parts of this domain. If you go on LinkedIn, you can like throw a rock on your newsfeed and like get something about technology and systems. Like how I built Clay to stock my family. There's a lot of stuff about tools and technology, but there's very little about process and people. And these are equally important parts of your system. Um, so what does that actually mean? Um, Revenue technology includes the tools needed to capture, generate, and manage and grow revenue. And so that technology obviously includes a CRM, but includes lots of other tools too. Enrichment tools, email marketing tools, the ability to schedule calls, you name it. It also includes the people who manage these interconnected systems. There's a lot of terms for this: biz tech, rev tech, business analysts, MarOps, sales ops, and it often includes, I think, uh, periphery systems and periphery domains that are often neglected. So in a big company like Ramp, we had RevTech and MarTech. In a smaller company, though, these can take different terms. It can take the terms of growth analyst, BA, MarOps, sales ops. So the reason I'm talking about all this is because I think I want you guys to understand that these are all flavors of the same concept. Much of the role in RevTech is about understanding systems, architecting systems, and then working with people not only to get stuff done, but actually like in service to their teams. This word in service is really important because I feel like, again, a neglected part of revenue technology is actually treating your the outcome as if they're a customer. So, for example, at Ramp, Justin and I would talk a lot about who is the end customer. Well, the end customer is the sales team. So your job is to treat them like a customer and your tools and systems like a product surface area. Revenue tech stacks have three priorities. Everybody knows this stuff, but this is just a helpful framework for how you can communicate it to the folks that maybe are asking you. Generate, close, and report, right? Generate is the ability to generate leads, handle those leads, and build pipeline. Close is the ability to convert those leads into something more meaningful, maybe to upsell them if they came in as a freemium tier or something else like that, and the ability to, again, reclose existing renewal pipeline. And then report is the ability to forecast, provide insights, and manage commission. Again, there's lots to unpack in this pipeline, but we spent a lot of time thinking about like what is the holistic framework for the activities and the capabilities of a revenue technology team, and this is it. So now let's think about these three priorities and how they actually are somewhat competing with one another, and then who are the people who have mandates over this part of a revenue technology stack. Well, generate is pretty easy. That's often lives under the marketing team's auspices. You have the CMO who is responsible for generating pipeline. This is often considered MQL or some other type of marketing qualified lead. This is creating lead gen, measuring marketing campaigns. You have closing deals. Now, again, you could argue pipeline generation is also part of the sales organization team. I would probably give you some pushback here and say that was definitely the case 5 years ago. Now I'm seeing instances where marketing and sales people are working together to create pipeline. So what does that mean for kind of the future of the revenue technology team? Um, and we can talk a little bit more about that at the end of the class if people have ideas. So close is the ability to efficiently manage deals. And the report is the ability to actually understand what happened and forecast what happens next. Um, Managing RevTech obviously is not easy. These are things that you probably have all dealt with. So again, I think for this first class, maybe a lot of what I'm doing is putting words to things that you already probably feel. So competing stakeholder priorities, we often talked about this already. You got three different sets of people that you have to manage and make happy. You have non-technical ownership. And this obviously is like a really big problem when you think about how to craft a team. You have folks that need access to tools that are not technical. You have folks who are often empowered to make technical decisions who aren't technical, and then you also have to manage non-technical resources who may need to understand but have no influence over the outcome of the stack. And then the last thing is, I think the natural flow of a revenue technology stack or any actually system stack, whether it's RevTech or MarTech or even operational tech, is that these are very complicated pieces of equipment. And you often have people who are first-time drivers testing them out. And that's totally normal and okay. We'll talk a little bit later about kind of the maturity of a rev tech stack over time, but there's this question of how much resourcing do you need? How much do you need to invest in process? When is the right time to hire the person to manage your stack? These are all the types of questions that get into why ad hoc decision making is actually really challenging early on for a rev tech stack and what happens over time. So now we get into this idea of building a go-to-market powerhouse. This is some marketing on our part. You guys are probably reading this and being like, "What's a powerhouse?" Um, and today we're going to talk about power as a function of being able to do your job effectively and efficiently. One of the things that I'd like to talk about a lot is that at the end of the day, uh, the whole purpose of a revenue technology stack is to perform a specific outcome. It's to do a capability. A capability is I can send an email, I can reach out to 100 people, I can log a call, I can, I can do something. It's a job to be done. So capability is really about, are you able to do the thing that your company is telling that you need to be able to do to hit the company level goal? And just taking a step back for a second, I think if there's one maybe most important point from this course that I'm going to keep coming back to, it's that the more you can do to think about your revenue technology and your stack and your organization as a helper to the company's primary goal, the more not only powerful, but the more effective you're going to be as an operational leader in your organization. So capabilities are just things that allow you as a leader in your organization to achieve the company's goals. And so powerhouse in this case is an equation where you're maximizing the capabilities that the team has and you're minimizing the resources that it takes to do that job. That's what power is, right? Now, I'm sure there's like a physics major in here who's like, you guys don't know what power is, but I think a lot about. So I told you guys before I like to bike and run. So I'm doing an Ironman in June, and power is often measured by watts. And so if you're on a bike, there's like lots of things you can do to maximize your watts. There's like you can obviously just be stronger. You have bigger legs, you're a better biker, but you can get a nicer bike. You can do small micro adjustments. Like you can change the cage of your water bottle. You can get an aero helmet. Power is not just the one thing. It's not just how big are your legs and how strong you are. It's a function of all these different things combined. And so that's hopefully what we can talk about today when we talk about power is how are you maximizing the output of your revenue technology stack and the capabilities you have while minimizing the resources that you're using to get to that outcome. Okay, so with that in mind, we're just going to dive into some tools. Again, I think some of this will be review for folks, but we have a wide spectrum of viewers, so if not, then listen along. Um, I talk about CDP, CRM, and warehouse because these are arguably the three core pillars of like any type of modern RevTech and MarTech stack. If you're a B2C company, you're going to be just used to the front, left, and right. You're going to be used to a CDP and a warehouse. A B2B company has to deal with a CRM because a B2B company sells to other companies. A CDP was never really invented or developed to help you sell to companies, even though they have this object called a company or an org, whether you use a cool like segment or post hog or amplitude. They really treat company as an afterthought because they were designed intentionally for B2C companies to do marketing. So really the only thing that changed between MarTech and RevTech is that you have this new system in the middle called a CRM that has to store people data and company data. Now, a big difference between a CRM and a CDP is a CDP is collecting what we call events. These are events that stream across the web. So somebody clicks a button, they navigate to a page, they perform an event, they open an email. These are all examples of product or marketing events that would live inside the CDP, and they would be tied to a known user in your application or an anonymous user who's browsing the web. A CRM is slightly different. It's actually, whereas a CDP is kind of a stream of data coming through, a CRM is a snapshot of data. So you can imagine, if you guys have ever seen The Matrix, there's all these numbers kind of scrolling indefinitely. You can think of that as a CDP. But if you were to take a photo of that at a moment in time, that would be much more akin to a CRM. A big problem with a CRM is that it does not often track live stream data about things that are happening in real time. You have records that have attributes, and these can be updated in real time, but you can go navigate to that profile of a contact and see them. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here on CRMs and CDPs. We could probably spend the whole hour comparing the differences. So I'm just giving a little bit of an overview. The last thing on the warehouse, people are very familiar with warehouses. I would say largely speaking, we're living in the warehouse moment, meaning most companies today are thinking about how do I move my data from the top of the funnel, from the mid part of the funnel into the warehouse. We have, obviously, there's a lot of nomenclature out there around like the warehouse native approach or, a composable CDP or composable warehouse approach. We can dig into that in questions too if people have it. I would say largely speaking though, underpinning all three of these things is a database. Like that's the commonality between all these things, is that they're just databases. They're databases to track different things, but they're databases. Now, you know, the reason why these tools were created for different purposes at different points in time, at the end of the day, though, with the right engineering resources and support, all this could be managed internally through a warehouse, through databases that you have access to. Quickly shifting to capabilities, and I'm just going to do a quick time check. We're at 39, and how many more slides I got? I only have 5 more slides. We're good on time. Um, Capabilities on the top of the 3 core tools. So we talked before about generate, close, and report. I would largely say that these pillars of capabilities are also anchored very closely to CDP, CRM, and warehouses. Now, that's not always the case. For example, you could have a tool that's connected to a CRM that's generating marketing leads. You might have a tool downstream or upstream that's helping you close on deals. But these are just big pillars of where a tool might be associated and what their capability is. Um, so let's talk about maybe one of the first important lessons to take away from the course, because I would largely say that this course is broken into two maybe reflexes. One reflex is to teach and educate and give you nomenclature and that will allow you to be more powerful representers in your organization. The other thing is just here are things that you should do based on experience. And this is one of those. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone into an organization to help solve some really difficult challenge, and the first question I ask is, great, well, how does it work? How does your tool system work? Show me your tool system work. And somebody's like, oh, well, I have this crappy diagram from, Lucid Charts circa 2017, but nobody's really logged it since. And if that's you, I would argue that you're ineffective in your role by not having your architecture beautifully mapped and understandable. So I'm going to show you in a second a diagram, and we're going to give you a template to build your own diagram. But I just want to spend a minute here and talk about why this is so important. Um, Diagramming, which seems like such a basic lesson to be paying to learn, is one of the most useful ways that you can create alignment in an organization. Largely speaking, because a diagram helps educate people on not only why you have certain tools, but what those tools are doing. It reveals what data is flowing to what spots. It reveals possible redundancies inside of the organization. It helps create alignment when you have new hires, abstracting you from having to do the manual work of explaining something to somebody every single time. And it creates opportunities for you to identify where in the stack should we spend time and where in the stack are there known dumpster fires that we're going to keep letting burn. Because another takeaway from this course that we'll share a little bit later is that there are different stages across the organization that may not feel comfortable, but you need to be willing to accept because you don't have the resources or the organization has not grown to accept kind of the idealized state of the world. A very common misconception, I think, in all type of systems land is that there's this perfect outcome that you can get to. There are only versions of bad, and you're pursuing less bad over your life. Like I will tell you that firsthand. Whether you're a small startup or Capital One, there are only versions of problems that get easier and easier to manage or come with trade-offs that help the business succeed. But I've never talked to an organization, I've never seen an organization, I've never helped an organization where the outcome was, oh, great, you came in and fixed all of our problems and now everything is perfect. So again, I don't mean to share this as a dismissal of our line of work or to damper any hope, but just to say that this is always a work in progress. And so you have to think carefully about where you spend your time and energy, knowing that you're living in an imperfect world. And that is the reason why documenting the imperfect world is a way to measure change. So historically, a stack would look something like this. This was taken from a diagram that I made back in 2016. I think this was with Postmates at the time. So this is a B2C example. Um, I can talk a little bit about what it would have been in B2B land. It would have been really simple. Right after mParticle, which was a CDP, you'll have an injection of a CRM to the right of it. The thing that I'm trying to highlight with this, though, is that a couple years ago, there was kind of like a classical way to do things. You collect data in one spot and you move it to a CDP or a CRM, and then that thing federates data elsewhere. If this was a CRM diagram, it'd be the same thing, like, hey, get everything into Salesforce, and then like we'll just manage it all to Salesforce. But that has a ton of problems, just like this has a ton of problems. The problem with a CDP doing this is that now if you want to get data back into the CDP, it becomes really challenging. Now, if you send bad data into your CDP, you're screwing yourself in all 12 of your tools. In a CRM, it's the exact same case. Like you might have everything in Salesforce, but it's really hard to manage. You got to hire engineers for it. And obviously, a really well-known problem with CRM is that it's not an event streaming library. It's not an event streaming architecture. So what's going to happen is that you can take snapshots in time, but you really can't understand what's happening in the moment in a CRM. That's the reason why, with the warehouse first approach, everybody's pushing their data into a place like Snowflake because they're getting that type of flexibility and granularity where they weren't able to do that inside of a CRM directly. So now we talk about what a funnel looks like today and why we're talking about the generate, close, and report capability. Obviously, you can take this and visually make it whatever you want. If you want to flip it on its side and have it go left to right, that's totally fine. We use this though because everybody's really familiar with a funnel. And you can talk to a RevOps leader and they know what a funnel is. They know that a funnel goes in one direction. You can't slide up a funnel, you go down a funnel. And that's one of the most important takeaways from how I think about data architecture in both, actually B2C cases and B2C, B2B cases and B2B2C is that you want to move your data as much as possible from one point of gravity to another point of gravity that has less. So if you were to, shift this on its side, it'd be from light to ref, for left to right. If you're moving from top to bottom, it's top to bottom. And this is to say that as much as possible, you actually want to structure your architecture so that data moves in one direction. And we will come back to this. This may seem unfamiliar at first, but one of the biggest problems you can make inside of a technology stack is having data movement in many directions without a clear or consistent rationale for why. So I'm not saying that it's bad to have data moving up in the funnel, but without having an understanding of why and creating a carve out for that, you leave yourself exposed to this place where you actually have no control over where data is moving, which then means, this is the real problem, is that when a problem occurs and you have to debug it, you actually can't root source analysis it very easily. It takes a long time to solve problems in a stack where you're moving against gravity. So largely speaking, though, you can see you have kind of capabilities in each diagramming section. You have generate, close, and report. And the generation side is usually where you'll find a CDP because the CDP is attached to marketing activities. It's helping you understand what people are doing on your website, in email, across LinkedIn ads. You're connecting all that data. Eventually, in a B2B2C or even a B2B world, that data moves inside the CRM. For example, even at Clarify, we use PostHog as our CDP provider. We move all that analytics data into our CRM. Inside the CRM, though, you have the ability to do things like schedule calls, manage contacts, uh, have call transactions prescribed, analyze call recordings, do follow-ups, all that kind of typical stuff that we'll get into in CRM later. And then warehouse is obviously where you analyze, understand, and report on it. And there's a piece that's missing from this, which is to say, well, at the bottom of the funnel, where does this go? And I would argue that with a reverse ETL and a tool like dbt, some type of transformation layer, it now becomes the part where you're funneling stuff from the bottom of the funnel back into the top of the funnel, right? Like, let's give you an example. We acquired a bunch of leads. They became customers. That customer data went into the warehouse. We modeled those customers into a suppression list that then goes back into our LinkedIn ads so that we don't target those customers and waste dollars on them. So you can think of it as a loop back into the top of the funnel. Now, again, you could flip this on its side and make it go in one direction, loop back around, whatever you prefer. I'm gonna just stop real quick to answer this question. It says, when we say CRM, is it fair to say that this includes the combination of MOF tools like outreach? I
Minimal.
don't
I
go
was
ahead.
thinking more with regards to that close phase where we think about like sales engaging with potential prospects or leads. Sometimes those integrations will translate to, let's say, like tasks or events in like SFDC. I'm just trying to think of this as like right now, it's sort of represented as a single tool, like a single CRM tool, but there's these other vendors that sort of bolt on to like Salesforce as an example.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And you're getting to where we're going now, which is to say the eventual outcome here is to create a stack where you group tools based on the capability that you think most represents what they're doing. This can live kind of anywhere along the stack if you can make the argument. I'm not telling you to, hey, you have to do it in a particular way. I would argue that a tool like Outreach would probably live either in outbound capabilities in the top of the funnel or could live in the close section. It doesn't really matter as long as you have the arrows kind of pointing from that tool down to the stream where it's connected. So I think what I'm trying to say here is you can group the tool based on the capability wherever you want, and you can have lines pointing to where the actual data flows separate from one another. Those two concepts are independent. Um, So, for example, the stack on the left would look something more like this in a funnel-based world. Now, what's missing from this diagram is, okay, well, we understand the general flow of data, but what about the specific flow of data? Like, I want to see the dotted line that shows me what's happening between Braze and mParticle. This would be a layer you could apply on top. And the reason I'm walking you guys through this is because a lesson I've learned over the years is that you don't always know the audience you're talking to. So one of the best things I can recommend is when you create this diagram, create it in layers. If you're using Lucid Charts or Figma, they literally have a concept called layers. And my strong recommendation is to start with the very basic one that doesn't have any data flows. It's just here are the capabilities grouped either in this framework or a framework that you like that maybe is different or an analog to this, because you'll have conversations with people on the revenue team who are going to be completely overwhelmed by seeing a bunch of arrows going everywhere and they're like, what? And when you can communicate with your, your senior leaders, especially CRO, they're going to be looking for something more like this. Um, and of course, so let's not forget to connect the dots. How are these things connected? For example, you can have a generate capability, a close capability that's talking to a specific tool but flowing data in another way. This is where you can add arrows to communicate what is actually happening at the technical level. And some great advice we give you is obviously you can color code things. A green arrow is moving down funnel, a yellow arrow is moving up funnel. This again is not, it's not red for a reason, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing to have data flowing up the funnel. I would argue though, it's an area though where you're exposing yourself to liability. Having data move backwards between tools is always a risk. The only time I would ever say it's not a risk or where it's like kind of expected in this go-to-market world of warehouses is when at the warehouse level, you're pushing data back into the top of the funnel or back into tools, and those things are not connected. So for example, if this CRM here was not connected to the CDP in a backflow type way, I would kind of argue the warehouse talking to CRM is kind of green, right? There's probably some enrichment data that you're getting from a variety of ETL'd sources into the warehouse, and you want your sellers to be able to see that data. So you're just, ingesting it back. Now, if you're trying to move stuff back into the CDP, I would argue it should have its own warehouse connector from the warehouse back to the CDP. Using tools in the middle to kind of like be the gateway to other tools up funnel is what creates a lot of the problems that we'll talk about around debugging later. Um, so here's like an example of our stack at Clarify. I thought this was actually really helpful because there are obviously folks here who are founders or are early operators. And I get this question all the time. Well, like you're building a CRM, so like how are you building your own CRM with these tools and capabilities? So you can see here we have PostHog on the far left-hand side. That's our CDP provider. We have LinkedIn ad data, which technically is getting pulled into Clarify. We do this manually though through a database connector. We also have Zapier to basically post stuff into Clarify. This is not necessarily really elegant, but me and Chris are kind of alone doing marketing, so this is what we had time for. Um, And then we obviously have ChatGPT, Apollo, Clearbit, and a bunch of other enrichment providers. Some of these are actually enriching on Zapier itself. Other times we actually have Apollo and Clearbit inside of Clarify working automatically. So that's why you can see that dual arrow, both green and yellow. On the right-hand side, we have outbound capabilities. We have two outbound capabilities called Lemless and Unify. Um, this is a one-way stream, basically. Like it's not a two-way stream. That yellow arrow is mostly because we have some Zapier hooks set up to notify Lemlist when somebody responds to an email and schedules a call. We have to like see that the call was scheduled from Clarify and then update Lemlist so that they don't keep harassing the person after they've scheduled a call. And then off to the right-hand side here, you can see we have tools like Luma and Condo. Luma is a event scheduling tool, and Condo is a LinkedIn management tool. And both these kind of loosely fill into Clarify through Zapier. So Luma is actually easier. It's just we book an event, like we have an event coming up in San Francisco. Actually, if anybody here is in San Francisco, we will have that event May 1st, and you guys are welcome to come. And then we have an event in LA on May 8th. So both those events, for example, will get scheduled. When people accept, that just fires off an event notification that appears in Clarify. So that's why it's a dotted arrow. And then with Condo, we have a Zapier hook set up where when somebody responds by LinkedIn, I can click a button in Condo and it will post the entire LinkedIn message into Clarify as an event on the contact record. In the future, I really like to update the field in Clarify, but we don't have that ability without writing an API call. So, just an example of where there is an ideal state, but I don't have the resources for it. So I'm doing what's good enough for now. And I think this is actually the story of a lot of how stacks develop over time. And then the last piece here is we stream our data into AWS and we post that out to PostHog and Hex as well. So I'll wrap up real quick and then we can leave a couple minutes here for questions. So up next, we're going to talk about what makes a stack great, flexibility, how to achieve it. We'll go over some people have heard of this framework before that we made for MarTech, but we'll go over it again. And then we'll talk about what great looks like across different stages of company life cycle. So pre-PMF, post-PMF, growth and scale. What I just showed you is obviously like pseudo PMF. We're starting to make money, but companies that make money are not necessarily PMF. And then we'll deep dive into ramp stack with Justin. And then I have some more stuff after that. So we have 5 minutes left, which is a lot less time than I wanted. So I think a lesson for me today is I got to move faster for next time. But with the time we have left, what are questions that people have?
Austin, I have a question about just how do we think about CDP in the context of B2B versus B2C? I think you mentioned a lot of the like event frameworks are capturing like a unique contact behavior. How do you
Mhm.
think about that? How would you think about it at Clarify or at Ramp?
Yeah. Um, there are some businesses that don't need CDPs at all, right? Like imagine like a rental company where their only surface area is like a contact us website. And the whole rest of their business is managed through people. And they might have an inventory technology that they use to rent out their houses, but like largely speaking, their their product surface area is just their website. They probably won't have a CDP, right? They might have an email marketing tool where they instrument some events like, they contacted us or they went to a blog, but they're really not a digital native or digital first company. And then you have a whole new generation of B2B2C companies where they have enterprise motion and they also have a website and they also have a product and they absolutely need a CDP. So a great example is Notion, right? Notion has a website, they have a product, they have an iOS product, they have an Android product, they have a Mac product, they now have a mail product. All those products have analytics that the marketing team is going to need to contact people and engage them and also to find new contacts. And so in that world where you have B2B2C, and I say B2B2C because Notion, in addition to allowing anybody to go sign up online, has the ability to create a enterprise organization for a company, and they will go after that company to try to acquire multiple seats. So for example, if they were trying to get Mars as an example to use Notion, they might have a sales lead whose job it is to reach out actively to Mars and say, one random person from your team sign up with Notion. We're trying to create a sales contact for you. And in those cases in particular, I see a couple things happening. First is like you have to have a CDP. A lot of people instrument the CRM before the CDP if they're an enterprise first motion, or the CDP first if they start as a solo company. So if the company is basically designing the product to attract individual users, they might have a CDP before they have a CRM. In both cases, though, you'll see the stack kind of get split. The splitting can cause a lot of problems. What I recommend is actually just, again, that funnel diagram is there for a reason. You collect everything at the top of the funnel. The CDP is then collecting that data and federating it to the CRM. Some of the major differences is that a CRM is going to it always has a known identifier for a user, which is called email address. A CDP doesn't always have that. A CDP has these called anonymous profiles, which are effectively blank profiles of people who have visited your website and performed actions that have never signed up or logged in or taken an action. And that data will not live inside the CRM. It will just live in the CDP in a database. Now, it may also go into the warehouse. As soon as somebody logs in, that activity will be tied to an email address. That activity then will federate inside to the CRM. The issue though is most modern CRMs don't really support event analytics. So like you can't, for example, see an activity timeline of all the actions somebody performed, on your website inside of Salesforce. That's just not how Salesforce is set up or designed. They don't have an event table inside of Salesforce. Now, again, not trying to make this all like clarify, but like we have the ability to do that. That's the reason why modern CRMs exist. Whether it's Adio or Clarify or Folk, like modern tools might have this capability. The way that most people think about it without, in the absence of modern enterprise tools is they do this type of analysis inside their warehouse. They say, I have my CRM activity data from Salesforce tied to an email address, and I have my CDP data tied to an email address. I will join by that email record inside the warehouse, and I'll be able to look at people and their events and all their contact record data at the same time. Because ultimately, a contact in a CRM is the same as a user in a CDP. They may have different properties on each of those records, though. A user may have 10 or 15 property records from the CDP, and a CRM might have 10, 15, 20 property records as well. And those tools live independent of one another unless you intentionally try to merge them. Cool. We are at time. Are there any burning questions? Because if not, what I was going to say is I will email everybody tonight or tomorrow. And if there are questions that you didn't get to, we can kick off with them in the next session.
I had one question for the next
Sure.
session. There used to be a world of inbound and outbound, and now this idea of a marketing qualified account is starting to surface. And identifying where that fits into the prospect life cycle is a harder thing to identify or piece together. We're doing it in the warehouse, but it'd be cool to address that as well as how do you actually navigate that with regards to sales attribution versus marketing attribution, creating that narrative because I don't know, it's sometimes tough to get buy-in. It's a zero-sum game at the end of the day, but you're also trying to navigate how it ties in with how salespeople do their work.
This is a great question, and Pranav is going to have a really spicy answer. So I want to answer that question, but I think I'm going to come back to it in session 3, if that's okay, Jehan.
Sounds good. Cool.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for the time. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut us off here just to be respectful of everybody's time. If you have questions, though, you can email me. If you have questions, you can drop them here before we go. We'll address them in the next couple of sessions. And thank you guys for making the hour today. Appreciate y'all.
Did you have a template that you wanted to share with us?
Yes, I do have a template. I think we have a template, right, Ben?
Yeah, it's actually in the Maven course in session 2. It's part of the session 2 template. It's a FigJam that you can make your own diagram with.
Okay, that's fine. If it's coming
Okay.
soon, I'll wait for that this week. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.